hope you guys are doing well and safe in the comfort of your homes. We're doing this, as it's very timely that we're doing this first work from home webinar. And we're very fortunate to have Ali Green as our first resource speaker in this very interesting subject that she's going to talk about. Ali and I met 2 years ago at Harvard Business School, and she's very intelligent, eloquent, beautiful, and also very successful in her business back there in Australia. And she's been doing the work from home setup for years already. And as what they say, experience is the best teacher. And without further ado, let me introduce you Ali Green to talk more about work from home setup. Ali?
Thank you so much, Paolo. Hi, everyone. Hello from Sydney, Australia, and welcome to my house, quite literally. You're currently viewing my study/guest room. Please forgive the mess behind me. It's many boxes that I've tried to professionally cover up with a sheet, and we'll actually talk about that a little bit later on in this session. But thank you all for joining me today, and thank you so much, Paolo, for setting this up. As already mentioned, I'm Ali Green, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Pantera Press. Now, it goes without saying that this is a very weird moment in history that hopefully will pass quickly, but in the meantime, it's good to acknowledge that this is uncharted territory for all of us. So I'm here to talk to you all about remote working, and hopefully I can help you make this transition a little bit easier in such a difficult time. So I'm just going to bring my slideshow up to share with you all, and we'll start to talk through it. So yes, today I will be sharing my 10 rules for successful remote working with you. But before I talk about my rules, let me explain why Paolo asked me to come and talk to you all. As I mentioned before, I'm the co-founder of Pantera Press. Pantera Press is a leading Australian book publishing house. We're now the #1 fastest growing independent book publisher in Australia, and we've been named the Nelson Bookscan Heat Seeker for 3 years in a row, which is the business showing most short-term and long-term growth. Now, over the past several years, we've experienced rapid growth and success. We're now an award-winning, market-leading, multi-million-dollar business, and we have operations in Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. But that's not what we looked like 12 years ago when we started. In 2008, when we opened up our doors, there were only 2 of us working full-time. Now, starting a business is incredibly high risk. So in order to keep our fixed costs low, I spent a few years living at my parents' house and working from their kitchen table. During that time, I was easily working 100 hours a week, and it was an incredibly stressful time. A few years later, in 2010, we moved into a very small office, but for the most part, I was still in that office space by myself for days at a time. It was only really in 2011 that our team began to grow, and in 2015 that we moved into the huge office space that we still occupy to this day. Long story short, having worked remotely during what was a very stressful period, I made all the mistakes and learnt a lot along the way about not just surviving, but thriving in that kind of environment. So I'm hoping that today I can share these learnings with all of you to help make your transition into remote working much easier. Now, before I jump right into it, you might be surprised to learn that what we're going to talk about today is not how to remotely access your files and your emails. In fact, most of today's content is less about work itself and more about a holistic approach to the personal parameters that will set you up for success. So over the years, I've compiled all of my learnings into 10 simple rules. Now, before I go through these with you all, I do want to add that there may be some things I say that aren't 100% applicable to your situation. So please use common sense first and foremost, and know that your company's policies and guidelines should always be followed. So let's get into it. Rule number 1, decide your office hours in advance and stick to them. Trust me, it sounds easier to do in theory than in practice. And this really is critical. It's incredibly easy to fall into a pattern where you roll out of bed, do a couple of work things, and before you know it, it's late afternoon and you haven't eaten or showered. This can happen at both ends of the day, and while you might feel really productive in those first few days, working non-stop and beyond a regular workload is just a recipe for burnout. And let's not forget the flip side, where it's equally easy to fall down a YouTube or a Netflix black hole and end up losing half the day after watching one short clip in the morning. So please keep in mind that when you're working from home, you don't have social cues around you like you would in the office. For example, colleagues leaving for the day or taking a lunch break, prompting you to do the same. So here are some really easy steps to follow. Number 1, allocate yourself set working hours. Mine, for example, are 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. For many of you, even when you're working from home, you'll already have set hours. You'll already have set hours, particularly those of you who are working in shifts, and that's great. The second is that when it's appropriate, communicate those hours to your manager, your colleagues, or even your clients, especially if any of them are on different time zones or likely to have different business hours to you. In fact, you can change your availability on Microsoft Teams to show your working hours. And if you live with other people, it's good to communicate your working hours to them as well, so that everyone in your household understands who is working and when. The next step is to set a reoccurring alarm on your phone to signify your start time and your end time. So in my case, I have an alarm on my phone that goes off at 8 a.m. to signal the start of my working day, and another that goes off at 6 p.m. to signal the end of my working day. Now, ideally, this would be a non-intrusive alarm alert. You want something that's gentle and won't startle you or make you tense. The alert should ideally be very different to the alert tone that you use when you wake up in the morning. I have an iPhone and I personally like By the Seaside, which is the alarm tone that I use for this purpose. I'm just going to see if I can play it for you. So there you go. It's nice and gentle, non-intrusive, a great way to remind me that it's the start and end of my work day. Now, the next point is to really make a concerted effort to start and wrap up work within 5 minutes of hearing that alarm tone. But be diligent. Obviously, if you're working on something, it's fine to wrap up, but you should always try to finish up within those 5 minutes and be diligent that you aren't running over this time on a consistent basis. And if something work-related comes up outside of work hours, ask yourself, if I was working out of the office, like normal, would I do this from home? Or would I wait until tomorrow to address it? And really, that should be your guide. And finally, gentle reminders are always useful. It's good to remember that no one would ever go out of their way to make you work outside of work hours, unless there was some kind of extenuating circumstance. So usually colleagues have just forgotten that you're on a different schedule to them. A quick email to clarify never hurts. For example, you could send an email or a message that says, I'm just wrapping up for the day. Did you need this urgently, or can I look at it tomorrow? Or you might say something like, just a reminder that I'm a few hours ahead or behind of you. So can we set a time that's in both of our business hours? There goes that tone again. Okay, rule number 2, separate work from sanctuary. When you're working from home, it's really easy for your work to spill into your downtime. For example, as I mentioned before, when I originally worked from home, I worked at my family's kitchen table. As a run-on effect, I'd often find myself getting ideas for work, or generally thinking about work, or talking about work whenever I sat down at that table. So that would include breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Again, maybe that feels productive for a short period of time, but after a while, it means you are always switched on and always tense. And this has a detrimental effect on your home life and your work performance. It's much harder to compartmentalize work when you live and work in the same space. So we have to be really diligent when it comes to separating the two. This rule, of course, links directly back to the first rule, that being strict with your work hours is just really important. But on top of that, it highlights that we need to think about physical separation and mental separation when it comes to carving out a sanctuary. So again, here are some really easy steps to follow. Number 1, avoid working from your bed at all costs. Your bed needs to remain a safe sanctuary for stress-free sleep. And ideally avoid working from your bedroom at all if you can. If your house allows for it, set up a room or a corner of a room that you can call your workspace. If not, make sure that you deconstruct your work area every night. For example, if you work at your dining table, as soon as your workday ends, pack everything down properly. If you have a work laptop, this involves not just closing it, but taking it off the table and ideally putting it into a designated spot, like into a work briefcase or a storage box or a shelf, really anything that's out of sight and out of mind. Now, the next step is a big one. This is my suggestion to turn off your email notifications outside of business hours. For me, this was a game changer. Because you work with your colleagues, and many of you have colleagues that are in other time zones or colleagues that work on different shifts, I'm sure it wouldn't be uncommon to get emails or messages from them outside of your office hours. Well, now that you're working from home, it's really important that your home space feels free from work outside of work hours. So for me, I actually turned off my email notifications from my phone permanently, meaning that I only get email notifications all the time if I'm either physically at my computer working or I've actively chosen to open the email inbox app on my phone to check. And now this isn't practical for everyone, but you can at least limit your notifications for business hours. And it's also really easy to do this on Microsoft Teams so that your colleagues are aware. And finally, take advantage of the perks. There are many things that in your everyday life you don't get to do because you have to go into work. And so, for example, there's lots of life admin that often I would do on the weekend that actually I can do when I'm working from home without interrupting my workflow, like doing the laundry. Rule number 3, use your commute time wisely. So the time between waking up and starting work is really important to your mindset and to your energy. When it's business as usual and you work out of an office, your morning routine might include going to the gym or walking the dog, meditating, getting dressed, having breakfast, and then listening to music or an interesting podcast on your way to work. Don't underestimate how important this time to truly energize really is. And don't underestimate the physical and mental benefits of having a routine. When you work from home, there is no official commute time to aid your energy levels en route to work or to help you decompress on your way home from work. So you really need to make a firm plan. So here are some really easy steps. Get up at the same time every day. Create a weekday morning routine that suits you. So, for example, mine is to walk my dog, have a shower, and then have breakfast. Yours will differ, but make a plan that suits your lifestyle and, most importantly, is something that you can commit to on an ongoing basis. Make sure that getting dressed is part of your plan. This might seem silly, and actually it's totally fine if you want to get changed into some fresh daytime pajamas or a daytime tracksuit, but whatever you decide to wear for work, make sure it's a fresh outfit for the day. Getting dressed surprisingly makes a big difference to mental wellness and to energy. And also, don't forget about the end of the day. It's actually just as important to decompress at the end of the day to help separate work from home life. So make an end of workday plan, just like you did for the start of each day. This is about creating a moment or an activity that signals to your body and your mind that work is over. This could be as simple as spending 20 minutes doing a gym routine, listening to some music or a podcast, playing with your pet, or reading an extract from a book. If possible, it's really good to do something before getting on the couch and watching some TV, something to really separate that work and relax time with a signalling event. And of course, when possible, go outside and get some sunshine. Vitamin D from the sun is incredibly beneficial for ongoing health of the body. Obviously, this is only if social distancing permits. Okay, rule number 4. Now, this sounds quite intuitive, plan out the day, but actually having a written plan for how you're going to attack the day makes such a big difference. I found it really helped me refocus and make sure that I got the tasks done that I needed to, not just the easy ones. So here are some really easy steps for you. Number 1, don't just start your day by jumping straight onto emails. Think about the priority items for the day and write them down in a list. Ideally, you'd actually do this when you're finishing work the day before. So you know exactly what to focus on when you start, work the next morning. The second is to identify when you have the most energy and brain capacity in a day. For me, it's in the morning. And so I plan to do the tasks that require deeper thinking during that time when I have the most energy. So again, for me, that's early in the morning. I also suggest that you allocate several email or admin windows of time throughout the day so that you aren't constantly getting distracted from these deeper thinking tasks by responding to emails as they pop up. For example, I only check emails at 10 a.m., 3 p.m. and 5:30 p.m., which frees up the rest of my time to really concentrate and do those deeper thinking tasks or have meetings. Now, going back to that idea of when you have your peak energy, my other suggestion is to try to schedule meetings that require brainstorming for when you have peak energy and schedule all of your other meetings for when your energy levels would typically start to fade. That's simply because when we have face-to-face meetings with people, it provides us with a spike of adrenaline and additional energy so this can actually be a very useful tool in itself to prevent your energy levels from dropping too much throughout the day. The next step is to plan for breaks, and I'll talk about this more shortly, but it's really important that any breaks you take during the workday are actually factored into your plan. They're intentional. And another tip, where possible, it's good to pre-plan your lunch or even pre-make it. It's one less thing to orchestrate, and often it's something that we don't think about. If you're anything like me, my office was surrounded by shops and cafes, and so lunch was never really something I had to think about. So just making that part of your sort of general admin ongoing can make life much easier. And finally, a daily stand-up meeting. This is a great idea when possible, and I believe some of you may have already implemented this into your daily routine. So this is just really a confirmation that having a short morning meeting or meeting during the day to see people face to face and share some of the things that you'll be working on in the day is great to do for energy levels as well as for personal accountability and motivation. Okay, rule number 5, health and safety. Now, this is really twofold. The first part is more so about occupational health and safety, which is really important that you're set up to work in a safe environment. And the second part relates more to security in terms of vulnerability to cyber attack. So first, let's talk about the occupational health and safety part. Here are some very basic and easy things that you should be thinking about. Make sure that the area you've set yourself up to work in your house has good lighting, has no loose cables around for you to trip over, has good airflow when possible. So for example, a window near you that you can open up. Ideally, you would have a proper desk, but a table can absolutely suffice. And again, in an ideal world, you would have some kind of ergonomic chair set to the correct height, although in these times, any chair is far better than your couch or your bed. Okay, so this second part of safety really relates to cybersecurity. And I know that your organization has already spoken about this, but it is important to realize that organizational systems can be more vulnerable to cyber attack when people are accessing those systems using unsecure networks like your Wi-Fi at home. And unfortunately, there are lots of bad people out there taking advantage of this vulnerability, particularly now that so many people are working from home. There are absolutely things that organisations can do to put in place to help with this, but actually the number one thing that you can do as an individual is just be more alert and aware, particularly of any emails or messages you receive that ask you to click a link or to log in somewhere and provide your account details, your account login details, or some kind of payment information. Now, there are a few general scams going around that I'm currently aware of. One is a WhatsApp message inviting you to upgrade to WhatsApp Gold. Another is a text message letting you know that there's a problem with your Netflix or your internet or your phone or your bank billing, something like that, that includes a link for you to click to fix the problem. Another is emails. So there's lots of emails going around at the moment, particularly offering products that you may not have been able to access with ease. So, for example, hand sanitizer or masks, asking you to click to purchase. And then also many emails going around asking you to click a link to reinsert your payment or login details for an account that you do have, or emails that appear to be from someone in your organisation or that are known to, your organisation, sending you a link or an attachment, but without context that you know what it is or would be expecting it. So really what I'm asking you is to be mindful. And the easy steps here to follow really are, in all instances, never click a link in an email or a message, ever. Instead, if, for example, you received a message from Netflix saying that there was something wrong with your account, don't click the link. Instead, just go into your internet browser and go to the Netflix website itself and check your account details there, or email Netflix support for clarification. And the same goes for if you receive an email from any work partner that you normally use as a business. So, for example, my business uses programs like DocuSign and Zoom for video conferencing. So if we were to receive an email from either of them saying there was something wrong with our account or we needed to change our details, we would just go directly to their website and contact them. We would not be clicking any links. And then the final one to be aware of is that you should always double check the email address that an email is coming to you from. It's very easy to change the name, but it's much harder to mimic someone's email address. So if you get an email from someone you know that doesn't properly explain what a link or an attachment in it is, check that the email address is correct. And if you're still not sure what to do, screenshot the email or the message that's come through on any of your work devices and send that screenshot through to your supervisor before you do anything else. All right, rule number 6, be social. When working remotely, it's very easy to go a full 24 hours without speaking in real life to another human aside from text or email. Social connection is actually really important for mental health and well-being. So a great solution is video conferencing, like we're doing now. When you're scheduling a remote meeting, it's really important that all participants have their cameras switched on. It should be the responsibility of the meeting organizer to ensure that the host and participants have their video on. But why is this important? Well, the first reason is that body language is actually critical to effective communication. In current times, we're talking about important issues and moving at great speed. So it's more important now than ever that we minimize room for miscommunication. The second is that video keeps everyone accountable, ensuring that they're paying attention and not multitasking during an important call. The third reason is that as humans, we're actually hardwired to look for faces. So video helps find and keep our attention for longer. The next reason is that video helps keep dispersed teams connected and aligned. And finally, as I mentioned before, face-to-face contact helps spike our energy levels. So here are some really easy steps for you. While it's important to find a balance to ensure that you're not having so many video meetings that you can't otherwise be productive, in times of social distancing, I do recommend planning at least 1 or 2 video conference meetings every day so that you are connecting with the outside world. I mentioned before a daily stand-up meeting, and that's actually a great way to connect, to achieve this social connection. And especially if you live alone, make sure that you do have regular social activities planned outside of work. So in times of social distancing, a video chat with a friend after work can go a very long way. And now let's quickly talk about best practices for video meetings. Always go on mute when you're not speaking. The next is dress appropriately. I mentioned before the importance of getting dressed each day, but on top of that, this is a reminder to dress appropriately when you have video calls. So that doesn't mean dressing up like you're going to the office, but it is important that you aren't in your bathrobe, for example. The next best practice point is expect distractions and lack of perfection. Forgive interruptions and understand that people are not operating business as usual. We're all managing with what we have. For example, when we got on the call, I mentioned the mess behind me, which is currently a stack of boxes that I've covered up with a sheet. So I moved house only a few weeks ago and I haven't had the chance to properly unpack any of my boxes, which is why I've covered them up with a sheet. In normal professional settings, I would try to have a very professional backdrop. But in these current times, we have to recognise that most people will be working from their kitchen table or their living room or even their bedroom and will have mess around them. And that's okay. We shouldn't judge or feel self-conscious. We are all in the same position, and that goes for not only our colleagues but our clients as well. And finally, when it comes to best practice for video meetings, don't forget to smile. In difficult times or difficult conversations, it's still really important to smile. It will alter your body language and your tone in a positive way, even when you're not feeling so positive. And while we're on the topic of communication, it's good to recognise that when we're outside of the office, we need to find multiple communication channels so that we aren't clogging up each other's inboxes with the usual emails as well as the questions that we might normally ask in person. So best practice is to continue to use email as you normally would, introduce video conferencing to replace in-person meetings. Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Teams Chat are great for formal messaging that isn't quite right to go through emails, and Facebook Messenger is great for informal messaging and for chat. Okay, rule number 7, don't be too available. In an office, you'll often see people close their office doors or pop on a set of headphones to signal that they should not be disturbed. And the same goes for remote working. It's okay to have periods of time where you're focused on a task and unresponsive to anything else. Remember that if someone needs to get hold of you urgently, they will. They'll call you or they'll find other ways to get your attention. So you do not have to have your email inbox open and respond to everything as it comes in. In fact, it's distracting and detrimental to work productively to do that. As I said earlier, I suggest setting allocated times in the day to check and respond to your emails. Rule number 8. As mentioned previously, it's important to not only take breaks, but to schedule them in ahead of time. When I'm at work in the office, I take daily lunch breaks, but on top of that, there are natural breaks in my working day. For example, my colleague might interrupt my work to ask a question and then mentions her weekend plans, and we have a chat about that for a few minutes. Or while I'm waiting for a document to print, I might quickly check my text messages. In everyday life, there are these many informal moments that take you away from work and give your brain a little bit of downtime. These moments of downtime are actually vital to keeping up your energy throughout the day. So, some really easy steps for you. Schedule in a very short break every hour. It doesn't have to be a long break. It could just be 1 minute or 2 minutes. The idea is for just enough time for you to stop, get up, stretch, and sit back down. Being hydrated is also very important. So I actually suggest having a glass of water every hour when you get up to have your 1 or your 2 minute break. The next easy step is don't look at social media during the workday. It is a slippery slope, especially when your office is at home. And finally, it's okay to feel a bit overwhelmed, particularly in these stressful times. So you might want to try some breathing exercises when you take these short breaks to regroup and to recenter. There are some, commonly used apps that you might want to consider to guide you through this. Headspace is one that I know of, and Calm is another, but there are many, many, many out there, so just something to think about. And finally, in addition to a 1 or 2 minute stretch and water break every hour, I recommend having a proper lunch break and a proper morning and afternoon break that's at least, more than 2 minutes. Rule number 9, take sick leave. Just because you're working from home doesn't mean that you have to continue to power through when you're unwell. If you find yourself feeling sickly, think to yourself, if I was at work with my co-workers, would I call in sick today? If the answer is yes, then working remotely shouldn't change that. Sometimes we need a day or a few days of rest and recovery. It's important to listen to your body, particularly in incredibly stressful times like we're facing at the moment. So if you need a sick day, take it and just let your supervisor know like you normally would. Okay, rule number 10. I kind of mentioned this already, but in an office environment, you would likely take social cues for meetings. That is, watching your colleagues get up to go to a meeting room, or even having someone tap you on the shoulder to grab you for a meeting. Working remotely doesn't offer those social cues. It's important that you keep track of your phone, video, meetings, and your breaks, and your start and finish times. So, of course, I recommend let's go to the easy steps. So, of course, I recommend setting reminders. So at the end of each day, I would review your calendar for the following day and set alarms in your phone for all the scheduled activities that you want to remember. So that's your start and end time, your 1 hour break for a minute, and your morning, afternoon, and lunch break. And ideally, you would be doing this again with a non-intrusive sounding alarm alert so that it doesn't make you tense up. It's just a friendly reminder. Another alternative to that, of course, is that you could set calendar reminders on your computer or in Microsoft Teams, but this really only works well if you're at your computer the entire time, which you may or may not be depending on your role. Now, I know I said I only had 10 rules for you, but there are some additional final tips that I'd like you to remember. Number 1, go easy on yourself. These are really challenging times. We've never had to navigate something like this before. Try to be disciplined, but recognize that these aren't perfect working conditions and you'll do your best. Number 2, smile. As I said before, it's very important when you're on a video call or writing emails or even talking to people in your house. I find that when I smile, my positive tone is always reflected, even in my writing, even if I'm not actually feeling friendly or upbeat. But on top of that, according to some research out of Stanford, having a positive attitude literally makes your brain work more effectively. Now, the next tip is respect the others in your house, be it your family, children, or housemates. If your space is shared, recognize that there will be times that this working from home is really frustrating for you or for everybody. Next up is to remember that this is not business as usual. You should expect distractions and be tolerant. I had a call with a client yesterday and my puppy ran into the room and started barking at me. These things happen. Similarly, a colleague's child might come into the room mid-video conference, and that's okay. It's times like these that we laugh them off. We don't expect everyone to be as professional as they would be in a normal office environment. We just go with the flow. And again, this goes for ourselves, our colleagues, and our clients. And finally, just to wrap it up, a little bit of a plug for my own industry. According to research from the University of Sussex, reading a book is proven to reduce stress by up to 68%, which is more than drinking a cup of tea or listening to music or going for a walk or playing video games. And even just reading for 6 minutes a day is enough to help reduce your stress by up to 2/3. So do support the book industry, and while you're all self-isolating, make sure you get your hands on lots of books and read them, obviously in your spare time. Thank you so much. I've now just put my contact details up on the screen. I believe we'll be moving to a Q&A section, but I certainly invite any of you to connect with me on these various platforms at a later time.